Forget generals. Forget armies. The fate of the Tang Dynasty once rested on a teenager with a horse. Not a hero, not a noble, just a courier and a scroll that could topple kingdoms. Imagine this. You're the lowest of the low in the entire imperial bureaucracy. You don't command armies or collect taxes. Your name isn't in any ledger of importance. Yet in your hands, you hold the power to start a war or grant a pardon. Your life is worth less than the horse you ride, but the message you carry is worth more than a city. This is the central paradox of the Imperial Courier. It wasn't glory, it wasn't gold, but for one breathless ride, you held more power than a general. The problem was simple: 5,000 miles of empire. How does one man in a palace control lands it takes months to cross? How do you enforce your will when news of your death wouldn't reach the farthest garrison for a year? The stakes were absolute. A delayed message could mean a missed opportunity to crush a rebellion. A lost scroll could starve a province. The empire didn't just run on gold and soldiers. It ran on information, and the entire system, this vast, sprawling machine of conquest and control, came down to one person: you. Your story didn't start on a horse. It started in the stables, shoveling what the horses left behind. You were invisible, a boy covered in filth, not fit to look a noble in the eye. But that's where they looked for us. The promotion wasn't about your family name. It wasn't about your wealth. It was about three things: a natural skill in the saddle that bordered on instinct, an obedience so complete it was silent, and a discretion that meant you saw everything and remembered nothing. This was one of the only paths in the entire empire where your birth didn't matter. If you had the talent and the temperament, you could rise. And when you earned it, the transformation was absolute. They gave you a uniform, a specific color, a marked insignia. They gave you a fresh, powerful horse. That horse and that uniform were your passport. They were symbols that screamed to everyone you passed: this man speaks with the voice of the emperor. He is not to be hindered. He is not to be questioned. For the first time in your life, doors opened. Villagers bowed. Soldiers stepped aside. For one flashing moment, the empire bent around you. You went from a boy in the muck to a shadow on the road, a blur of imperial authority. But earning the title was just the beginning. The real wonder was the machine you became a part of. You weren't a lone rider on an epic journey. You were a single cog in the most sophisticated communication machine the ancient world had ever seen. The secret wasn't just your speed. It was the system waiting for you. Every 30 kilometers, like clockwork, stood a relay station. These weren't just rest stops. They were precision-engineered pit stops, manned by attendants who knew their one job: get the courier back on the road. This kind of ancient logistics wizardry is what Stick and Tell lives for. And trust me, it gets weirder. A fresh horse was already waiting, muscles twitching, ready to run. They'd hand you new boots if yours were worn. A bowl of hot food and a flask of wine were thrust into your hands, all to be consumed in the 90 seconds it took to swap mounts. The mathematics of it was staggering. Covering 30 kilometers in a hard ride, you could cross the entire 5,000-mile empire in under 2 weeks. Messages reached the farthest frontier faster than most people could imagine. And there weren't just a handful of couriers like you. There were thousands. Over 1,600 relay stations blanketed the empire, each stocked with horses, spare equipment, and coded ledgers of every run. Scribes logged your departure time to the second. If you were late, it wasn't just a bad day. It was a crisis. Scrolls were sealed with wax, silk cords, and hidden marks known only to the imperial court. Anti-forgery protection in a world where one fake order could burn a city to the ground. Messages were often duplicated and sent along multiple routes, in case one of you disappeared in a landslide or accidentally drowned in a river. You weren't just fast, you were built into a system that planned for your failure. And the miracle wasn't that the messages always made it. It's that they almost always did. Most of the time, you never met the other couriers. But sometimes, during a handoff, you did. For a few minutes, you'd share food, sharpen a blade together, or pass on a whispered warning about a blocked pass or a hungry tiger on the trail. These brief connections were the only fellowship you had. A brotherhood built in transit, without names or ranks, just speed, silence, and trust. But the roads had their own dangers, not just the living. Couriers carried charms against ghosts. It was said restless spirits stalked the night. Some tucked jade beads into their saddlebags. Others whispered to their horses at every relay, not to calm the beast, but to ward off whatever followed them. When the Emperor's payroll doesn't cover exorcisms, you improvise. In an empire this vast, you didn't just outrun rebels or storms. You outran the unseen. We think of the Pony Express as a marvel, but this was the Pony Express with the full, terrifying budget of an empire behind it. Forget Amazon Prime. Tang couriers were prime before Prime, only faster and fueled by broken bones instead of free shipping. This was infrastructure on a scale that boggles the mind. If that blew your saddle off, hit subscribe. The Tang Dynasty's logistics department just ran circles around the modern world. But the glossy efficiency hit a brutal reality. This machine was powered by human sacrifice. Your body was a consumable resource. The relentless pace shattered health, broke bones, wore men down to nothing. The Empire didn't just provide the horses and the stations. It provided an endless supply of young men willing to trade their lives for a taste of purpose. You were a replaceable part in an irreplaceable system. But the message in your bag? That was anything but replaceable. FedEx can lose your package, but if you lost the Emperor's message, you lost your head. That sealed scroll in your saddlebag wasn't just paper and ink. It was condensed power. The Emperor's seal wasn't just symbolic. It was sacred. A heavy red imprint pressed into wax, backed by silk threads and secret markings. Breaking that seal without permission was the same as trying to impersonate the Emperor himself. And for that, there was no trial, only execution. If you were carrying a scroll that could change history, would you peek? Drop a look in the comments or tell us what secret message you'd smuggle across the Empire. It could be an Imperial edict, a sentence on a piece of parchment that would dismantle a government overnight. It could be military orders, a set of instructions that would mobilize 10,000 soldiers. It could be tax records, the financial lifeblood of entire provinces, or treasury documents that move fortunes across the empire. Sometimes the weight was a name, an execution warrant for a powerful general or a disgraced noble. You might be galloping through the night to deliver the very reason for your own death, your saddlebag carrying the signed order for your execution if you failed. This was the forbidden knowledge. You never, ever broke the seal. To read what wasn't yours was a death sentence. Your ignorance was your shield, but you knew, you could feel the gravity of the message. A single scroll felt light, but the accountability was crushing. Your life was the collateral for its safety. Lose it, and you were a dead man. Damage it, and you were a dead man. Be late, and you were a dead man. You were no longer just a courier. You were a living, breathing extension of the Emperor's will, and the price of that honour was your own neck. But the job didn't end at just carrying the message. It evolved. You became the Emperor's eyes in places he could never go. A corrupt governor might think his schemes were hidden, but he never accounted for the silent, observant courier passing through his courtyard. A general plotting rebellion might guard his tent against spies, but he'd wave the lowly message-bearer right through. You saw everything. The state of the grain stores, the morale of the troops, the whispers that stopped when you entered a room. The court began to rely on your quiet observations. You'd deliver your sealed scroll, and in a private moment, deliver an unspoken report. A few words about border fortifications looking neglected, a mention of a local official living far beyond his means. You had access to the entire inner workings of the empire, invisible, overlooked, but everywhere. This was the psychological toll. You carried state secrets in your bag, and personal secrets in your head. You knew who was about to be demoted, who was about to be enriched, who was about to die. You became a walking archive of dangerous knowledge, trusted with the Empire's most fragile secrets, all while earning a courier's meagre pay, a spy's secrets, a peasant's salary. The privilege of that access was a hair's breadth from peril. You learned to keep your eyes open and your mouth shut. But sometimes what you saw refused to stay silent. A commander boasted drunkenly about a troop movement that shouldn't exist. You reported it. A tax collector had 3 mansions and no receipts. You made a note. A noblewoman passed you a sealed letter for the general. You delivered it, but not before mentioning it in the capital. These weren't betrayals. They were insurance. You became fluent in whispers, fluent in absence. What wasn't being said, who wasn't there, what should have been in a granary but wasn't. You were the one person who moved between palaces and provinces without question, which meant you saw patterns no one else could see. But knowing that much came with a new danger. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in the Empire was the person you hadn't even realized you were spying on. And the peril was everywhere. First came nature. A mountain pass vanished in a storm. A river swelled into a deadly torrent. A horse spooked, and one broken ankle meant death. Not heroic, just over. Then came humans. Bandits knew couriers might carry treasure. Rival factions plotted to intercept your message. Some bandits grew clever. They dressed as fellow couriers, uniforms stolen from corpses. They'd ride up beside you, matching your pace, and then vanish into the hills with your scroll. To stop them, the Empire sometimes sent decoy riders, false couriers carrying worthless papers, bait to draw the knives away from you. And worst of all, the corrupt official whose crimes you had accidentally witnessed, a man with everything to lose and the local power to make you disappear. But your greatest enemy wasn't outside. It was the system itself. The brutal pace broke men long before bandits ever could. Exhaustion made you careless. A fall could shatter bone. Sometimes the message itself was a trap, so volatile that carrying it made you the target. The irony was absolute. You were the lowest paid servant of the state, yet you gambled with the highest possible stakes. You weren't just a courier. You were a one-man intelligence network, a vital artery of power, and the most expendable asset the Empire possessed. You were never celebrated. You were rarely remembered. You were expendable, but you were also irreplaceable, a nobody who carried the Empire on his saddle. But the Empire held together, not because of generals or scholars, but because someone like you kept riding. Not a hero, not a noble, just a courier, a teenager with a horse. And somehow, that was enough to hold an empire together. Now that you've ridden with the Emperor's ghost, check out Why It Sucked to Be a Royal Food Taster, another job where one wrong bite could end your career and your heartbeat.